Miami Heat are coming off of not exactly one of their greatest seasons. This was a team that was ravished by injuries, and it definitely showed as they finished 10th in the Eastern Conference. But things might be turning around. Miami is coming off of a really solid offseason, one of the better drafts, and they had some stars that took some huge leaps. So I'm actually pretty excited for this Miami Heat team, especially in a wide open Eastern Conference. Welcome to 30 teams in 30 days. Let's get into the Miami Heat. Last year, the Miami Heat went 37-45. They were 10th in the Eastern Conference with the 21th ranked offense and the 9th ranked defense. They were perfectly in the middle of all NBA teams with the 15th net rating. However, despite Herro having a breakout season and Bam Adebayo having a really good second half of the season, it didn't carry over into the playoffs as they were swept by the Cleveland Cavaliers. That now makes the Miami Heat 1-8 in their last 2 years of playoff games. Not exactly very good. This is the fourth oldest team in the NBA. This is a team that, like I said, dealt with injury issues, and they also dealt with the Jimmy Butler situation. So there are some good reasons as to why the Heat didn't exactly have a strong year, and they didn't really have a strong year before that either. Miami's kind of in a tough position as well because they are perfectly in the middle. They're definitely not bad enough to tank, and they shouldn't tank by any means, and that's not really the Miami way. However, they're also not really good enough to compete. However, I think that could change this year. Let's talk about the moves that the Heat made this offseason and how that might just turn them around. Where else to start but the Norman Powell trade? Because this is, I think, a significant trade for the Miami Heat. And not a lot of people are talking about that. We're only looking at the John Collins point of view. So a few weeks ago, the Miami Heat traded for Norman Powell, and all they had to give up was Kyle Anderson and Kevin Love. Already, this is a really good trade for the Heat as they're getting a huge upgrade for very little. Last year, Norman Powell averaged 22, 3, and 2 on a 48% from the field and 42% from 3. Powell is one of the best sixth men in the entire NBA. He's a positive defender, he's a great shot creator, he's a great three-point shooter, and he can either create his own shot or do it off the spot up. He's a guy that I think has the perfect mold to fit alongside a guy like Tyler Herro. If he wants to play at the 2 position and Herro can play at the 3, then they can run someone like Mitchell at the 1. Or you can have Herro at the 1 and then Powell at the 2, and you just kind of get that flexibility depending on the kind of size you want. But they essentially traded 2 guys who barely played last year. I think Anderson and Love combined for like 70 games or something like that, for a guy who not only plays consistently, but he's a 20-point per game scorer. And now the Heat really have 4 guys who are capable of dropping 20 on any given night. That is absolutely huge for them. Another move that the Heat made, and this one is probably a little more neutral, but it was trading Duncan Robinson for the Italian two-way player Simone Fontecchio. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. Sorry, Fontecchio. So Fontecchio is coming off of a pretty solid season by his standards. He averaged about 7.5 points per game while shooting 36% from 3 and being a good defender in both Detroit and Utah. We'll have to see if he can be a little more consistent than a player like Duncan Robinson, but he does fill a similar role. While he's not as good of a three-point shooter, and he's probably not as good of a scorer either, he does fill that size role as he is 6'8". I don't expect him to have a super big role, but I think he could add to this team's overall depth. And last additions to talk about is I want to talk about the Heat's 2 rookies because I think there are some real reasons to be excited about them. So the Miami Heat's 20th overall pick and their only first round pick, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but Kasparas Yankunchunas, I think is something along that, but I think he is one of the better picks in this entire NBA draft. And a lot of analysts agree that this was a pretty good late round pick, something we've definitely seen the Miami Heat do, and we know that this is a good developmental team. So despite Kaspara not exactly having the best summer league experience, he is still someone that a lot of people are calling a better player than advertised. Scouts really liked him as a good isolation scorer, he's a good ball handler, playmaker. He was about an 84% free throw shooter, so that gives him huge upside to shoot the ball from 3 and from mid-range, and he was also a pretty solid defender, albeit he wasn't the most laterally quick guy in the world. He's not a super big athlete, his shooting isn't the greatest, he only shot around 31% from 3, and he was mighty streaky on that, and he also had kind of a high turnover rate. But this was someone that I actually saw comparisons to in Austin Reeves, the kind of positionless guy who can play the 1, 2, or 3 position moderately well, can drop you in maybe in mid-teens, be a decent shooter, while not being a complete throw pick on defense. He is only 19 years old, so he is one of the younger players in this draft class, but I think he's a guy for Heat fans and just NBA fans in general to watch for, because Austin Reeves to me is a really intriguing type of player, and it would be really interesting to see how he does in Miami. I think at the very least he can become a solid 3-and-D player, and that is always going to be one of the most valuable players in the NBA. So another player worth talking about, and of course it's someone that I can't pronounce, but I think hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Vlasvidov Golden. Just gonna call him Golden for now. But he is a Russian older style center, and I think he could actually fit kind of well, at least coming off the bench, even though Miami already has some decent center depth. So in his 5th year at Michigan, he averaged about 16.5 points, 7 rebounds, and 1 assist per game. And like I said, he's that old style center sitting 7'1", 240 pounds. He's a good screener, he's a good shot blocker, and he had one of the best post games in college. However, in that old style, he's not exactly the most athletic player, being average at best. Not much of an outside game, not much of a playmaker, doesn't really have a lot of touch sitting outside of the paint. Honestly, I kind of see him as a Jahlil Okafor kind of player, where he can be a good scorer and he actually can be really good in the paint while being an average, maybe above average defender. But is that really what the modern NBA wants, or is it what the modern NBA needs? I don't know, because as we've seen, Jahlil Okafor can't make it work in the NBA, but then he absolutely dominates the G League. Golden was a two-way player and he wasn't drafted, so I don't know if he's going to be on this team's final roster a few months from now, but he might be someone worth watching out for. I love watching players who can make it work in the post. It's fun to get that little bit of throwback, and I think the NBA is maybe skewing a little too far away from it. So outside of rookies' names I can't pronounce, the Heat, despite being one of the older teams in the league, do have some really solid rotational players and young pieces. One of those solid rotational players who I think is going to be getting a lot of minutes starting this year is Davion Mitchell. Mitchell is coming off of an incredibly solid year. He averaged 8 points, 2 rebounds, and nearly 5 assists per game while shooting 47% from the field and 40% from 3. He had the best stats of his career so far playing in Miami, as he averaged about 10 points and 5 assists on 45% from 3. He was also a positive player both on offense and on defense, and then like I said, I think he's someone that could be starting. Yes, I did mention Norm Powell, but Powell is also the perfect 6-man to come in and drop you 20 points. But he also plays really well along with Tyler Herro. According to 2-man lineups, him and Herro were plus 5.7 points per 100 possessions, and he also was a guy that played really well with Highsmith, Ware, and Bam Adebayo. Mitchell is 27 years old, so I don't think that there's going to be some big breakout season from him, but I think he could just be a solid starter who can play make a little bit, he can shoot the ball a little bit, and he can defend well. He also adds into this team's flexibility as he can start, or I think he can come off the bench really well, and we've seen Miami do a little bit of a blend of that. The next player to talk about is the Nikola Jovic that we have at home, Nikola Jovic. So despite the fact that I call him it, Jovic is one of my favorite young players in the league, and I think he's really surprising a lot of people, and that's not just because he has the same name as the league's best player. So Jovic is coming off of a really good year. He averaged nearly 11 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists per game, 45% from the field, 37% from 3, and then 82% from the line. He had career highs in its minutes, assists, stocks, points, and in a lot of his advanced stats, and he was one of the few players to have positive on-off stats in the playoffs, just like Mitchell. And at just now turning 22 years old, I do think Jovic is a guy that has upside, and he makes me feel confident in some of the Heat's other picks, as he was drafted 27th overall. Like I said, not only is Miami good at finding late players, but they're good at developing those kinds of players. And another good player, especially as his time as a rookie, who did have a down season, that's Jaime Jaquez Jr. Now, I'm a huge fan of Jaquez Jr., probably more than what some Heat fans are, but he really is just that archetype of style player that I really like. He is one of the bigger small forwards in the league who can defend and he can rebound, and he kind of just has a good solid all-around positionless game, and he can play that smaller power forward kind of spot, or you can move him up to the shooting guard. In his rookie year, he was 4th in Rookie of the Year voting, and he was 9th and 6th Man of the Year voting, which is pretty solid for a rookie. But in the last season, he averaged just 8.5 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists, while his efficiency dropped, going 46, 31, and 75 on his shooting splits. Now, his box score stats and his efficiency did drop. However, his advanced stats and his per 36 stats did remain the same, or actually got slightly better. However, his minutes were also something that did take a pretty big drop, and that was something that definitely confused a lot of Miami Heat fans. On the last game of the season, he actually dropped 41 points, hella impressive, and then he only played 1 minute in the play-in game against the Chicago Bulls. That's kind of a weird decision for a player coming off of a big game, even if it may not be the most important game of the year. And then on top of that, in his rookie season in the playoffs, Jaquez Jr. started in 4 games and played 31 minutes per game in those games. In last year's playoffs, he only played in 3 of the 4 games, started in 0 of them, and only averaged 6 minutes per game. This is definitely a weird decision. I mean, we don't really see a lot of players have these kind of year-to-year minute drops, especially if his advanced stats were still somewhat similar. But like I said, I'm a huge fan of him. I'm a huge fan of his archetype of player, and I really hope that we can see him come back and have a little bit of a bounce back year, or at the very least have a bounce back year on another team, because he's the kind of guy that I always trade for when playing 2K. And the last player to mention is another player who had an incredibly solid rookie season, and that's Kel'el Ware. So Ware was drafted at the 15th overall pick. He had 9 points, 7.5 rebounds, and 1 assist per game on 55, 31, 68 shooting splits. On top of that, he also had an above average PER at 17.4, and he had 4.1 win shares. So why am I bringing up these advanced stats? It's because amongst all rookies, Kel'el Ware had some of the best advanced stats in the entire draft class. He was second in the total amount of win shares and tied for box plus minus, both of which being with Zach Edey, and he had the third highest PER amongst all rookies. And I actually think Ware is a big part of the reason as to why Bam Adebayo played power forward minutes for the first time in a few years. But despite running a two-man center lineup, something I time and time again say is going to be something we see a lot in this upcoming season, it was actually a positive lineup for the Miami Heat. When these two guys played together, they had a net rating of 5.0 per 100 possessions. And then when you add in Tyler Herro to that same duo, they had a net rating of 7.3 in 500 minutes. This isn't exactly a obscure lineup for the Miami Heat. I'm expecting that Ware is gonna have a jump in this upcoming season. I hope that we see him play more minutes, and I really hope that we see this lineup of Ware, Adebayo, and Herro play even more. And speaking of Bam Adebayo, let's talk about him. So Bam Adebayo did not exactly have the greatest year, especially as he had a really slow start to the year. On the season, he averaged about 18 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists on 48, 36, 76 shooting splits. Like I said, he did have a down year, but he happened to turn that around. After the All-Star break, he averaged 21 points per game, was 51% from the field, and he had an incredible 45% mark from 3 on almost 4 attempts per game. This year overall was a huge year from 3 for Adebayo. He was someone that barely shot 1 attempt per game on not exactly the greatest efficiency, but then this year he was up to 36%, a pretty average to slightly above average mark, especially for a center, on 3 attempts per game. And of course, while he exploded from 3, it's Bam Adebayo. He was still one of the best defending centers in the league, with that rare ability to guard just about any position and be able to switch onto anyone and guard the perimeter. He did miss the All-Star break for the first time since 2022, but I think this upcoming season could be a year for him poised to return to it, especially if he carries on this 3-point shooting momentum and if he carries on what he did after the All-Star break. And his partner in crime, one of the players that I am absolutely incredibly high on last season and going into this season, and that is Tyler Herro. Tyler Herro is coming off of a breakout season. He averaged 24 points, 5 rebounds, nearly 6 assists on 47, 37, 88 shooting splits. This was the best year of his career when you look at things like his games played, his minutes, his points per game, assists per game, and he also kept his turnovers in check, something we don't see too often. He earned his first All-Star appearance and, like I said, was one of the league's most prominent breakout players. The other thing that I was really surprised by was to see his 2-point game, his mid-range game, and his ability to attack the rim increase. We all know that Tyler Herro was a pretty solid 3-point shooter, but it was from within the arc that he took probably his biggest leap. On 2-point attempts from the year prior compared to this year, he went from shooting 48% from 2-point in 2024 to shooting 56% while being assisted on less of those opportunities. Overall, I've talked about this at length in one of my older videos, but Herro has grown as a playmaker, he's grown as a shot creator, he's not exactly the greatest defender in the world, but I wouldn't call him an awful defender, and he's really defined himself as the #1 player on this team. I'm really rooting for him, and I really want to see if he could break out into a near superstar level player. And one other man to talk about, yes, I am calling him a star. I don't know if he exactly deserves that based off of his play, but his pay definitely puts him there, and that's Andrew Wiggins. I mean, actually looking at him, Wiggins is only making $28 million this upcoming season, and he has a player option for $30 million. With like a contract like what Devin Booker just signed, this isn't exactly star level, but it's still pretty high. Anyways, let's talk about Wiggins. So Wiggins is coming off of another pretty solid year ever since we really seen him emerge into the player that he is today. He averaged about 19 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists with 1.2 steals and 1 block per game. So about 2.2 stocks per game, steals plus blocks combined, in his 17 games played for Miami. On top of that, his shooting splits were about 45 from the field and 36% from 3. he was just slightly a negative 2-man lineup with Tyler Herro, and he was a minus 1.8 lineup with Bam Adebayo. Most of his positive lineups were when he was surrounded by shooters, something that came from his Golden State era, and I do wonder if he just needs more time to gel with players on the Heat and gel with the Heat star level players, or if he's just not the perfect fit. But he did average 19 points per game in 17 games. It just wasn't exactly the best from an on-off standpoint. But 17 games is a very small sample size, and I think that's something we often forget as fans. But Wiggins is someone that I think can turn it around and be one of the better two-way players in the league and really help out this Miami Heat team. Despite being one of the older rosters in the league and despite not having a good year last year, I do think the Miami Heat have one of the better rosters, especially in this wide open Eastern Conference. So I don't know exactly what their starting lineups are going to look like, but one example starting lineup, I think if we're just looking at their 4 best players and trying to get them together, that includes Tyler Herro, Norman Powell, Andrew Wiggins, Nikola Jovic, and Bam Adebayo, but of course I think Jovic and Kel'el Ware can be substituted out depending on the kind of spacing that the Heat are looking for on a particular night. And although I didn't really mention them as much, there are still some other solid players on this Miami Heat bench. Of course there's Jaquez Jr. and Davion Mitchell, but there's also Haywood Highsmith, Alec Burks, and Terry Rozier, and then there were the 2 rookies that I mentioned, guys who probably won't have to do a whole lot, which I think is really good for their initial development. But the question I have with Miami Heat is, are they good enough? This is the 4th oldest roster in the league. They have star level players, but they don't have guys who I would call the #1 on a championship team. But Bam is coming off a solid second part of his season, and Tyler Herro is coming off of a breakout year. If healthy, and if Tyler Herro makes the jump that I really personally want to see from him, this could be a huge bounce back year for the Miami Heat. I'm thinking at worst probably a top 6 finish. While the Eastern Conference is wide open as the Pacers and Celtics won't really be competing in this upcoming season, I think the Heat could do even better. And not to mention, they also are coached by Erik Spoelstra, one of the best coaches in the NBA, and a guy who is more than used to making the finals or making deep playoff runs when nobody is expecting it. So given how much effort and given how healthy they stay in the regular season, I definitely can see this Miami team finishing in the top 6, and I think they could surprise some people from finishing even better than that. They did get younger this season, and I think Miami Heat fans have a ton of reasons to be excited. They have 2 star level players, they have a group of young guys who I think can be really good, and they have one of the best supporting casts in the NBA. This is going to be a good Miami Heat team, and who knows what happens when that team makes the playoffs. This has been 30 Teams in 30 Days. If you liked the video, you know what to do, and I will catch you all next time.